Horror Nights presents 4 true scary clown horror stories. Number 4. Tyron Vickery. At about 2 in the afternoon on December 3, 2016 in Gainesville, Florida, a local restaurant which caters to children and is known for having actors that wear large mascot suits was hosting several birthday parties. When the restaurant was at its busiest, a mascot dragged a locked trunk out onto the middle of the floor. There was something in the trunk that kept hitting the lid and the sides of it. The children gathered around the trunk and the large mascot rodent put the key in the lock, unlocked it, and removed it. He then pushed his way through the crowd of children who were fixated on the trunk. Meanwhile, whatever was inside the trunk was trying to get out. Finally, the latch became free, and the lid opened and out jumped a naked man wearing a rubber clown mask. He was flailing wildly and fell down as he tried to step out of the trunk. The children ran away screaming. Now, out of the trunk, the man grabbed onto the mask and tried to pull on it. However, this only caused a muffled scream. A police squad car was at the restaurant in less than 3 minutes. They tried to get the man in the clown mask to stop moving. He didn't, and when he got too close to the police, they shot him. When the police tried to remove the mask, they couldn't. It appeared to be glued on. The body with the mask still on it was sent to the morgue, and the coroner found that the mask was held in place with superglue. They were able to remove the mask, and inside they found that duct tape had been wrapped around the man's face, covering his mouth and his eyes. He also had earplugs that were held in place with superglue. The doctor did a blood test and found that the man was high on flagga, a designer drug that is 10 times more powerful than cocaine. There was also a needle mark in the young man's arm, suggesting he might have injected the flagga. One thing they did note was bruising on his wrists and ankles, and the coroner said that this was from being tied up. A few hours later, the young man was identified as 19-year-old Tyron Vickery. Vickery was a Christian youth minister and he was not a drug user, so they reviewed his last movements, and about an hour before the incident, he was seen on a surveillance tape casually walking down the street. Suddenly, a van pulled up beside him, and within seconds, 2 men whose faces could not be seen on the tape grabbed Vickery and forced him into the van. The police concluded that Vickery was kidnapped, handcuffed, and stripped. The kidnappers covered his eyes, ears, and mouth, and then glued the mask to his face. They also cut a bigger nose hole in the mask so he wouldn't suffocate. They injected him with flagga and stuffed him into the chest. By the time Vickery got into the restaurant, he would have been high and he would have felt blind, deaf, and mute. The police had several clues in the case, but they've not named any suspects. Number 3. April Samson's 9th birthday. For April Samson's 9th birthday in 1995, her parents, Gilbert and Nina, hired a clown named Fonlini, whose real name was Donald Caldwell. Caldwell was a reputable clown who was known for his sleight-of-hand magic tricks. 20 kids came to the party which was being held at April's parents' house in St. Louis, Missouri. As Fonlini's show was coming to an end, he got April involved in a trick. First, he had April choose a card. Caldwell was supposed to pick the wrong card, then set it on fire, and after the fire finished burning, the correct card would be pulled out of thin air. It was a trick that Caldwell had performed dozens of times. However, this time something went horribly wrong. The lighter fluid sprayed out on April's face, and a spark lit her face on fire. Instead of stopping and rolling, April started running around, which only made the fire spread. She was finally pushed down and smothered. She was rushed to the hospital and survived, but her face was left horribly scarred. After the accident, the police wanted to speak to Caldwell, but he was nowhere to be found. April's family says that he ran off in the chaos that ensued after the fire. So the police went to his apartment, but he wasn't there. In fact, he had disappeared. At the time, the police just assumed that Caldwell picked up and left town instead of dealing with any possible consequences. They figured that sooner or later he would pop back up again. They turned out to be correct, but not in the way they thought. 3 years after the accident, Caldwell's torso and head washed up on the shore of the Mississippi River. His body was badly mutilated. There were words carved into his body that had healed and scarred over. His eyelids, nose, and lips were also missing. The coroner was able to confirm that some injuries were years old, but Caldwell's heart had just recently stopped only a day or two before his body was found. The coroner, who had worked for a decade in the morgue, was pale when he explained to the officers that he thinks the man was tortured and dismembered over the course of 3 years. The officers asked how something like that was possible, and he explained that a person would have actively worked to have kept Caldwell alive to torture him for that long without killing him. This brought Nina Samson to the top of the suspect list for several reasons. She had motive due to the scarring of her child. Caldwell was last seen at her house, and she was a surgeon. She would have had the know-how to keep someone alive while cutting off body parts. The police interviewed the Samson family at their home. April was present, but she didn't say much. In the years since the fire, she refused to go outdoors and was taught by a tutor in the family's home. The family said they hadn't seen Caldwell since he lit their daughter's face on fire. They even consented to a search of their home. In the basement, they found a soundproof room that smelled strongly of disinfectant. When the police asked if they could bring a forensic team in to look at the room again, the family agreed because they said they had nothing to hide. The forensic team examined the room, but there wasn't a single speck of blood. Without any physical evidence, no charges were laid against any of the Samsons, and no one else has been charged in the murder of Funlini the Clown. Number 2. The worst night of Simon Redmond's life. The early morning hours of November 28, 1993 were the most terrifying hours of 6-year-old Simon Redmond's young life. Simon, who worked as a child model, got up around 4 a.m. to go to the washroom in the house he lived in with his mother, Laura Redmond, in Los Angeles, California. He was walking back to his bedroom when he saw a man and woman climb through a window, so he ran to a hidden crawlspace in the living room. Because of the position of the crawlspace, Simon could see the living room, but no one in the living room could see him. He discovered it one day while playing hide-and-seek with his mother. He watched her as she genuinely got panicked because she couldn't find him. He watched the people who appeared to be a man and woman go into his bedroom. When they came back out, he saw that both had dark hair and they were wearing black and white makeup on their faces to make themselves look like gothic clowns. When they couldn't find Simon, the couple became agitated. So they went to the next bedroom in the hallway, which was Laura Redmond's room. The next thing that Simon heard was his mother screaming. She was dragged out into the living room where she was tied to a chair. The couple tried to act nice and said they were clowns there to play with him. He also heard his mom yell out to him to stay where he was and not to come out. That is when the man started punching her. The woman said that if Simon came out, they would stop hurting his mom. However, Simon felt paralyzed with fear, so he covered his ears and closed his eyes. He could still hear it, but it was muffled. When he heard the beating stop, he uncovered his ears, and that's when he heard the woman scold the man. "You hit her too many times," she said. "She's dead, man. You killed her." That's when they decided that it was best to get out of the house. Simon waited for the house to be quiet for 5 minutes, and then he got out of his hiding space. Sadly, the 5-year-old boy had to walk by the body of his battered, dead mother to call the police. 2 days after the murder, 20-year-olds Lyndon Randall and Crystal Gaston were arrested after Randall came in with a broken hand and both had traces of black and white clown paint on their faces. In custody, they confessed they were both addicted to meth and they wanted to kidnap Simon to sell him into human trafficking. Both Randall and Gaston were sentenced to life in prison without the chance of parole. After the home invasion, Simon stopped modeling and he moved in with his father, who also lived in Los Angeles. Simon went to counseling for a few years but stopped going before his 10th birthday. Everyone thought that he was a normal kid. In fact, he excelled in a lot of ways. He was a star wide receiver in high school and an honor student. He got a scholarship to a top-level university and became a lawyer, joining the Los Angeles District Attorney's Office shortly after graduating. Everyone thought that Simon had channeled all the horrors of that night in the best ways possible. However, things all changed in May 2015. Over the course of a week, 5 people in Los Angeles were all attacked in a brutal fashion. Someone had taped them to a chair and flayed some skin off their faces in a pattern. After the attacker was done, they all looked like clowns. Amazingly, all of them survived. In fact, all of them mentioned that the attacker went to great lengths to keep them alive. A detective in homicide heard about the case, and when he saw who the victims were, he gave the detectives on the case a suspect. The victims were 2 convicted pedophiles, a woman who was set to go to trial for human trafficking, and a well-known meth dealer. When Simon, now 28, was questioned about the attacks by police, he said nothing. The police knew that he was the perpetrator, but they had no evidence against him. Also, the best they could do was charge him with felony aggravated assault because, after all, it wasn't attempted murder because he supposedly went out of his way to ensure his victims would live. The only question that Simon ever answered about the attacks came from a reporter. She flat out asked him if he was in any way responsible for the attacks. He apparently smiled and said, "I'm not saying I did it, but if I have to go to prison for 10 or even 20 years, I can accept that. However, these people are going to look like clowns until the day they are cremated or their skin decays from their skull." He then walked off without answering any other questions. Simon Redmond has never been charged with the crimes. However, he chose to leave the district attorney's office, and it's unclear where he is working today. Number 1. Julianna Almanza. On the night of February 7, 1983, Rebecca and Fabian Almanza of McAllen, Texas, were awoken by the screaming of their 5-year-old daughter, Julianna. Rebecca got out of bed and checked on her daughter. Julianna was awake and said there was a clown in her room. Rebecca said that it was just her imagination and told her to go back to sleep. She rubbed her daughter's back and tucked her under the sheets. "Please, don't go back," Julianna pleaded. Then, without warning, Rebecca was struck in the back of the head with a hammer. It didn't knock her out, but she was left incapacitated. She tried to gather her wits, and she saw a man wearing clown paint and dressed like a hobo pick up Julianna and walk out of the room. Rebecca tried to gather her wits, but she was too dizzy. In the hallway, she heard her husband and her daughter screaming. When Fabian went to stop the kidnapper, the clown sprayed mace in Fabian's face and he was blinded. With both of her parents incapacitated, the clown simply walked out of the house, and that was the last time that Rebecca and Fabian saw their daughter. There was no trace of Julianna or the clown for 10 years. Then, out of the blue, on the day before Halloween in 1993, a blank envelope was left in the mailbox of Rebecca and Fabian. Inside was one Polaroid picture of a blonde teenage girl dressed like a hobo clown. Her parents are sure the girl in the picture is Julianna. However, the police are not certain. After that picture, the kidnapper went quiet. That is, if he was the one who put the envelope in the mailbox. Rebecca and Fabian are still hopeful that their daughter is still alive. Subscribe for more.